Hi everyone, my name's Jonny Munby, and great to be with you by this video, and thank you to Earl for inviting me to share with you my thoughts and reflections on Psalm 16. A bit about me: I'm Jonny, I live in Middlesbrough, I'm married to Beth, I've got 2 kids, I'm on the leadership team at Middlesbrough Community Church, and I work at Teesside University. So whistle-stop tour of me. I was really glad when Earl asked me to share, particularly on this psalm. It is one of my favourite psalms, and it brought out a few things that I'd love to share with you today. So I'm just going to go through from the top here. So Psalm 16, keep me safe, my God, for in you I take refuge. And it just got me thinking and reflecting, what does it mean to take refuge from God? Obviously for David, he was maybe, hiding from Saul's army at the time. But for us, what does it mean? What do we need to take refuge from? Maybe it's from our guilt or our shame. Maybe in other countries, Christians are still obviously facing persecution, or maybe it's physical danger. For me, one thing I feel like it's important to take refuge in God in is about the noise and distractions that come from the world, or even my own thoughts, or even the devil, that would try and make me forget who I am, try and take my peace away. And if I ever start to feel like that, I know I can always run to God, and that His arms are always open by His grace, by His amazing salvation, that I can take refuge in Him and know that I'm safe in Him and safe for eternity. So in verse 2, I say of the Lord, you are my Lord. Apart from you, I have no good thing. I have no good thing apart from God. Obviously, it's talking about God being the highest good, the only source of goodness. It's quite a strong saying, isn't it? That apart from God, I have no good thing. Does it mean that there's nothing good other than God? Or maybe it means that only God can give good things. Or maybe it means detached from God, I would have nothing good, because it's only by being part of His family that I have anything good, because all good things come from Him. Makes me think, about my marriage, my kids, my house, even, this Bible. Is it good? These things are good, aren't they? But apart from God, if we try to live a life apart from God, we would find ourselves in the miry pit, where in the end we would have nothing good. Verse 3 says, I say of the holy people, or the saints, who are in the land, they are the noble ones, in whom is all my delight. Some translations say the majestic ones, or the excellent ones, in whom is all my delight. In a psalm about delighting in God, this passage seems strange. It moves from verse 2 being all about God being the only good thing, and now it's talking about having our delight in people. It could mean compared to the other people on the earth, those who don't follow God, those who are not God's holy people. David here is talking about God's covenant people, the people who are maybe in God's grace or in God's place. At this time, he's talking about, the people who are following Him, kind of obviously Israel that he's ruling over as king, or maybe at this time he was commander of rebel troops trying to overthrow Saul, and he's thinking about this flock, this people. But for us, how do we feel about the holy ones in our land, the people of God, the church? Do we delight in them? Is our delight in the people of God? There are often divisions, there's often too much pride and too many grudges held in the church against other people of God. And in John 13:35 it says, by this they will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. Now it's important, isn't it, to love one another and to delight in one another. And I think sometimes when, being a leader in a church, maybe it's by God's grace, but He puts this thing in you where you kind of You ache for for their well-being, for their happiness, for their joy, and you delight in them when they do well. When they celebrate, you celebrate. So, yeah, it's our delight in God's people. If we are to become like God, we must become like him in his delight for his people. Verse 5, I love this verse. Lord, you are my portion and my cup. I love this imagery of food and drink. That God satisfies our soul, our body, our mind, our spirit in a way that food can't. And then verse 5 and 6, it says, you make my lot secure. The boundary lines have fallen for me in pleasant places. Surely I have a delightful inheritance. It may not feel like this for you, that the boundary lines have fallen in pleasant places. Maybe you're having a really hard time. And that's really hard to deal with, isn't it? But I guess we've got to remember that earthly security is fleeting. And our boundary lines really are this, that we are in God's family, that you are a child of God. You can never be removed from your eternal inheritance in God. Moving on towards the end of that verse, it says, I will praise the Lord who counsels me. Even at night my heart instructs me. I will keep my eyes always on the Lord. With him at my right hand I will not be shaken. This is a bit about worship. Worship is the key. It's so easy to restrict our worship, what we think of singing, to Sunday mornings, but the mark of true discipleship is a change of heart, where worship is a lifestyle, where it's that adoration of our majestic God. So, yeah, and it's actually setting the time aside, and maybe that question or challenge, does my heart instruct me to worship at night or before I go to sleep? Not usually, actually, but I am trying to do this more, to keep my eyes always on the Lord. The eyes are important, aren't they? In Luke 11:34 it says, your eye is the lamp of your body. When your eye is healthy, your whole body is full of light, but when it is bad, your body is full of darkness. It's often thought that our eyes follow our desires, so if we want something, then we'll go and look at it. But actually, I think, and the Bible seems to suggest, that our desires follow our eyes, and it's what we let in through our eyes that fills our body with light or darkness. So my other question is, what do you spend your time looking at? Is it noble things, godly things that fill you with peace and joy? Or maybe we spend too long watching TV or scrolling on social media or looking at what we may buy. It is a challenge, isn't it? What do we spend our time looking at? The last section of this passage is quoted in Acts 13:35 as a messianic prophecy about Jesus and his resurrection. And it says, therefore my heart is glad and my tongue rejoices. My body will rest secure because you will not abandon me to the realm of the dead, nor will you let your faithful one see decay. You make known to me the path of life. You fill me with joy in your presence, with eternal pleasures at your right hand. And I think because we may think, oh yeah, that's just about Jesus, we miss the gold in here about our inheritance. What is our inheritance? It says, my heart is glad, my tongue rejoices. And the reason our heart can be glad, and what is our eternal inheritance, is that the Lord is my portion and my cup. Remember back earlier on, where was it, verse 5, the Lord is my portion and my cup. That delight in God, what I might call Christian hedonism. If you do a study on Bible verses about delighting in God or desiring God, you'll find right through the Old and the New Testament this idea that God can be delighted in and he will satisfy our souls. If you look in Psalm 23, it's always we think about the Good Shepherd and the valley of the shadow of death, but the bit that I like is where it says, you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. It's talking about God being not just our shepherd, but our host, at the banquet feast. And actually the feast on the table is God himself. That actually we get to feast on him, that he satisfies our souls. The Christian way of choosing how to behave, or we might call ethic, it's not about duty or fear, not about being scared of what God might do if we get it wrong. I believe it's hedonism directed at the right thing, that we delight in God and then delight in his ways. As we feast on him, we learn to delight in his ways. We get to know the path of life. In his presence, his fullness of joy. One of my favourite quotes from C.S. Lewis is this: "We are half-hearted creatures fooling about with drink and sex and ambition when infinite joy is offered us, like an ignorant child who wants to go on making mud pies in a slum because he cannot imagine what is meant by the offer of a holiday at the sea. We are far too easily pleased." C.S. Lewis is just saying, do we really realise the pleasures, the eternal pleasures at his right hand that we can have for eternity, but also in this life, as we learn to delight in him, the Lord, my portion and my cup. So those are my reflections on this psalm. I hope it blessed you today. Great to have some time with you, and hope I see you again soon.